Aquafina?
It's kind of a big noise.
This is a brand new experience for me. Gee, I've never interviewed either of these guys in my life before.
Wow.
Actually, the new part of the experience is I've never been in this finished alumni cottage on the bluff at Clinton Community College before.
Welcome to the cottage. Corey.
I'm delighted to be here on, what is this, the 5th day of August. 2011. Beautiful, brilliant sunshine, something that we, at least these two guys, deserve.
No one will dispute that.
And first of all, I have to say that when Steve first came here, he was only 17.
Just a young man.
He and I, when was that? What year was
2000,
that?
well, 2001. Actually, I was here in the early 90s. I was the director of career planning.
I know that.
But when I came back, it was 2001.
And we talked about this.
Yeah.
And we talked, you know, we did a tour of some vineyards in real time yesterday on the 4th of August, and this wonderful gentleman who was born in Switzerland talked about dreams. You know, who would ever guess we'd have multiple vineyards and wineries in northern New York? And he talked about dreams. You talked about a dream. We've talked a lot about dreams.
Gotta have dreams.
And isn't it nice when dreams come true? The first time I looked inside this building,
It was pretty rough.
shambles is not even
It was gutted.
nearly
Gutted.
gutted.
Yeah.
So here we are. We're going to talk about that much later. But Dr. Frost, Dr. Richard Frost, is a dear friend who's written a lot about this area, who's hiked every square inch of space from here to Luzerne, Switzerland.
I'm not sure we can document that.
Oh, we can't. Well, you got to keep walking,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
And we don't know how many pairs of boots, hiking boots you've gone through over the years. But what attracted you to this bluff?
I was attracted to this bluff way before the book was even a dream, as you put it. It's always been on my tour of the high spots in the county for any out-of-town visitors. The view from the back veranda here is, without question, the best view in the county.
There is no question in my mind. You can only guess how many times I've been here, with and without Calvin, standing in awe from that veranda up there, and walking back and forth. We've done many programs, and you are absolutely right. When I have out-of-town guests, there are several special places I take them, and one of them is right here. And I had a grandson who insisted on coming here when there was 4 feet of snow on the ground one winter recently.
Yeah.
And we tracked out back, and of course we weren't dressed for the occasion, and I said, you asked for it. And they did. He and his German girlfriend stood on the back and said, wow.
Wow.
I said, come in the summertime. So give me the history of this book.
I'm kind of minding my own business one day back.
You never did in your life.
Back in the fall of 2010, and I got an email from Marianne Weigelhofer, who is the librarian here at Clinton, and Priscilla Hammond, who was the director of public relations, telling me that a centennial celebration was planned for this building, the second Hotel Champlain. One of their interests was having a book written about it, and would I be interested? I said the usual, well, tell me more about it, tell me what you expect, knowing that eventually I would probably say sure. And I drew up an outline for them and came over, and we had a meeting, and I'm sure the outline was read by many people, probably including Steve.
Oh, yeah.
And like most original outlines, I hope it doesn't exist any longer. And we decided to go ahead. You talk about dreams. This was maybe early November, and they told me they wanted it out in time for a July gala to celebrate the centennial. The only nightmare that came out along the way is the publisher said to have it ready for July, he would have to have it on March 22nd, which looked very short on my calendar there.
People who watch this program may not have any idea what it takes to put a book out of any size and shape, and this is just beyond.
I had no idea. I mean, working with Rich,
This is like being locked into the Iron Maiden, right, Doc?
Well, it's not just the writing of the articles, it's the detail,
Oh,
it's
of course.
labeling the photographs, it's
It's
doing the
historical,
captions.
so you have to get it right.
The number of words, I mean, it's absolutely amazing, the amount of work that went into this project. And I think Rich stayed up a lot of long hours here finishing this
You
project.
needed special hiking shoes for this one, huh?
I think I saw, probably every photograph of the place that exists in the North Country. But it was really kind of amazing how many people called me with information. I put a couple of notices in the newspaper, and I got called by people with postcard collections. I got called by people who worked here in the 1940s. I had somebody come in with a photo scrapbook put together by their family when they visited here in 1915.
Oh, I love it.
Lots of resources. The deadline, usually I don't let deadlines loom in front of me until I'm in the final stages. On this one, the deadline kind of loomed right there as a...
There.
When I first went to the word processor to flesh out the outline a little bit. But it does take a lot of work to put a book together. Here, I got fortunate because Clinton Community College put together a lot of resources for me. I mean, number one, Steve already had a head start on the history. He knows the history cold. Marion Weigelhofer had already been collecting some information. They assigned me a person to do some of the graphic design work and help edit the photographs.
That was Gina Brightwell.
And she clearly had no idea what she was stepping into when she said, sure, I'll help.
Most people don't when they, yeah.
And we had some long afternoons and evenings and weekends. I'm happy to say the book got done exactly on schedule. It went in on March 22nd, just like the publisher wanted. It turns out, of course, that when a book goes in March 22nd, you're not done. And we still had to re-edit. We wanted to change some of the photographs. The publisher deserves some credit, too, because they listened to us all the way through.
Mm-hmm. Who is it, Steve? Who is the publisher?
The publisher was, I gotta look it up here.
Yeah, the Donning Company.
Donning Company is, and they did a lot of local books. They did Bluff Point's first 100-year history.
Where are they located?
They're out of Virginia. And they were very good to work with, and they specialize in historical projects like this. I saw one from SUNY Oswego, did their college history. I looked at the book, and it said Donning. I said, that's what they're specialized in.
Okay, so that worked out pretty well from that point of view.
And I had worked with them before, because when I did the history of Plattsburgh 6 or 7 years ago, that was the company.
Oh, it was?
And the only thing that was different is I was more assertive this time on what I wanted, and they were terrific.
You and I spent some time chatting at my dining room table, trying to identify photographs for that book, and that's still a classic.
Yes, it is.
I still look through it and say, wow, because I know what you went through.
And there's still unidentified photographs if you want to kind of put your mind to it again.
Oh, God, yes. But that's the way it always is. None of these photographs are unidentified. You said there are, of all the photographs that were taken, you think you saw them all. It's hard to believe that many were taken, but there were, because this was a very popular place.
I would say Rich discovered some photographs that hadn't been seen in years.
Well, that scrapbook, for example, from 1915.
Yeah.
We clearly have photographs in here that have never been published. There's certainly photographs that haven't been seen or published for 75 years or more. Again, we got help everywhere. The Clinton County Historical Society opened their archives to us, and they helped walk me through what they had. The public library, the Plattsburgh Public Library, has a new librarian in charge of the local history section. Her name is Kelly Sexton. At first she was a little bit chagrined because she didn't think she had that much to offer. And then she started looking around the basement, and we found wonderful photographs that I'm sure haven't been seen almost since when they were taken in 1897 and 1899.
Glass plates?
We didn't have the glass plates. There are glass plates that I know exist that I haven't seen.
I know they exist.
But these had all been printed, presumably from glass plates, because you look at the format of these. A lot of these were 8 by 10,
sure,
12 by 16 photos.
You know they were glass plates.
These are of President McKinley when he was up here, when it was a summer lighthouse.
Don't you love it?
Beautiful photographs of the president when he was up here for those 2 years.
So you looked through thousands?
Oh, I always hate to use the word thousands unless I can say there was at least 2,000, but certainly close to 1,000 photographs, maybe a little bit more.
That's a lot.
There's 150 to 160 in the book, and there were some that didn't make the cut that I would have loved to have put in.
Yeah.
But that's always
book.
Always the way. You gotta have a sequel, right?
Yeah.
It's like Mark Twain said, it's always easier to write a long book than it is to write a short book.
Well, and there's no question, as you know, you've written several, and I've written a few, and so it's hard to boil it down. So who who was involved in the process of deciding how many of those photographs to put? How many were there? 100, 160?
About
I
160.
think the publisher had it limited in a number of words, a number of photos. The hard part was choosing which of all those photos should we put in the book.
Which to use on the cover.
Right.
Now, this is a classic photograph. And
And if you
even-
count, Gordon, if you count the stars on the flag in this photograph, there's 48 stars
Oh, yes, of
on that
course.
flag.
I love it. I love the pic. I've seen that picture before. That's a very
Yeah.
popular photograph.
This came off the Library of Congress. So for anybody who wants to go to the
This is
Library of
the back.
Congress, the Library of Congress website has some incredible photographs. You just type in Hotel Champlain in the search engine, you can see them.
The history of this place is almost mystifying to me. I mean, it was an edifice just because of where it's located that was astounding to people who could. And even now, when I'm out on a boat, I don't own a boat, but when I'm on a boat in Lake Champlain, I look up here.
When you cross the ferry, you see this
When you
beautiful
cross the
building.
ferry, you
Okay.
see it from all over the place. So I'm sure. Do you remember when you first discovered the bluff?
You know, I can't remember the exact moment, but I was brought up here the first summer I lived in Plattsburgh 30 years ago. People said, you have to see this. I had no idea at the time that the college had only been here about a year at that
Yeah.
point. I mean, but it was just a wonderful view, right from the get-go. It's, to me, history is full of accidents, and one of the remarkable accidents around here is nobody ever bothered to tear down these old buildings. And it's fortunate because they easily could have been during some well-intentioned renewal project. It's wonderful to just have this history still be here.
Sometimes natural disasters like fires and floods take care of the tearing of the buildings down
Yeah,
and
true,
destroying
true.
them. So it is fortunate that this.
But you can see why they decided to build this resort hotel in 1890 with that beautiful view of the lake. And Rich was able to dig in and find the history of the meetings that started this whole project with the people from D&H Railroad Company and the Champlain Transportation Company and the hotel. And so it's a very fascinating section in this book about the very founding of the hotel up here.
What was the most exciting part of putting this whole thing together for you? I
There's
know
not-
it's a job.
the most exciting part actually is seeing the final product when it gets delivered.
Ain't that the truth?
But there's no one high spot because even to the last day before we sent the book in, we were still finding photographs that we ended up including.
Absolutely.
So it was never a lull. And I think one of the good things about a project that has to be compressed into a relatively brief period is you don't have time to kind of rest and reflect on that much. We literally put in 2 photos into this book that came to our attention the last day before we sent it into the publisher. This is why Gina Brightwell probably wondered what she was getting into, because she
Working
probably
with those
thought
guys.
there weren't that many emergencies in her line of work, but we made them into emergencies.
Well, it's 82 pages long,
No. It's 112.
112 pages.
Can't argue with the
I got the
author.
long glasses
No,
on.
that-
Can't argue with the author. I don't even know how many pages. He knows.
Sure looked like an 8 with these old.
Yeah.
With these
112.
112 pages.
You proofread it enough, you know exactly how
Oh,
many
but
pages
you
are
know
in it.
every single word. I love this.
But speaking of words, Gordon, I didn't realize it took us probably 3 weeks to determine the title. I mean, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between our small work group. I mean, every word on just the title took 2 or 3 weeks to finally settle on.
Because you had a committee, you should have left it to one guy and.
Well, you know, it really was. That was perhaps the most difficult
It
part.
was.
And when I would be discussing it with people, say, "You mean you're writing a book? You don't know what it's going to be called?" And there's a lot you want to get across in a title. And you certainly, I mean, Hotel Champlain is a key part of the story. Obviously, Clinton Community College is. It looks pretty simple now. It makes you wonder
Well, Bluff
why
Point-
it took a fair number of people with a reasonable education
This is
so
true.
long.
But how many times have you heard this story,
Oh.
naming things?
Oh,
As soon as you
edited.
get a committee, you're gonna get 9 different
Re-edited.
opinions.
And unlike some books that I've dealt with, I look at the title and I'm still happy with it.
Yes, me too.
Often I second guess myself after the book comes out. This one I'm very happy with the title.
I'm glad we debated it and worked hard. It's
exactly
exactly
what it needed to be.
Yeah.
So is it chronological?
Yes, It is chronological. It starts with, and I'll give you the simplified history. 1890 was the first Hotel Champlain. The initial chapter of the book is sort of the pre-hotel history, which includes some of the military history on this lake. And if you took today's media, ESPN probably would have set up shop here because they could have had a war of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had bleachers, you could have watched a small skirmish in the French and Indian War. You had a perfect view of Benedict Arnold and the fledgling American Navy in the Battle of Valcourt during the Revolution. And you might have needed binoculars, but you still could have seen the Battle of Plattsburgh in Cumberland Bay from here. So,
And people did watch these battles.
true.
This was an occasion. They even brought a picnic lunch to watch the Battle of Plattsburgh, you know?
And there was a gentleman named Smith Weed who was a major force in early Plattsburgh history. It's a name I think that's been almost forgotten now. But he was a local boy. He was born on Chateauguay Lake, moved to Plattsburgh to go to school, went off to Harvard Law, we're talking about in the 1860s or so. Got his law degree, came back to Plattsburgh, and he was a mover and a shaker. He built the largest theater in town, did a lot of real estate development, was a principal in the Chateauguay Ore and Iron Company, as well as a bunch of the other early Plattsburgh industries. And he bought this entire bluff almost. I forget how many acres, but it's written in there. And initially, he planned to build a home here. He started building roads, he built a small observation tower, and at some point he said, this is the ideal place for a resort. While all this is going on, you got the Delaware and Hudson Company, which is actually a very interesting company, but really what they were interested in was shipping coal. And they were shipping coal first on a canal and then on railroad lines. They began to realize all these cars with coal could also tug a few carloads full of people, and they started transporting people and developing a leisure industry. They owned all the steamboat companies on Lake George and Lake Champlain at one point, along with having the railroad line to Plattsburgh, and they built this hotel to improve the financial status of the railroad. They knew they had something here. Smith Weed had brought them to the area and introduced them to the project. I can't find it written exactly, but it's very clear reading between the lines that Smith Weed wanted to be a partner in this. Mm-hmm. And it's equally clear he did not end up being a partner in this, although he sold the land to the Delaware and Hudson and was on the original board of directors of the hotel. 1890 it opened. So that, but the prehistory was very interesting to go through, and I hope people will read that as closely as they do the text about the hotel and the seminary and the community college. Then I'll give you the simplified outline, and then we can go on from there. The hotel was popular immediately. They sold out rooms from day one. By the end of the first year of operation, they decided to build a 200-room annex, connecting it to the main hotel by a glassed-in corridor. By 1897, William McKinley had come here, ostensibly for his wife's health. This became the summer White House for 1897 and 1899. By 1909, when the tercentenary of the discovery of Lake Champlain by Samuel D. Champlain was celebrated, this became the headquarters for the New York celebration. And then the history has a big snag, because in 1910, a month before opening day, the hotel burned to the ground.
Horrendous fire.
Yeah.
In looking back, the thing that really interested me is the Delaware and Hudson Company did not blink. They were ready to build almost immediately. There was never any question that they were going to rebuild, and they only lost one season of operation. This opened in July 1911.
Incredible, considering the time.
Within a year, they built the second hotel.
That would be tough to do today.
I have reason to believe you couldn't get through the permitting process today in that period of
Well,
time.
there's no question in my mind.
And then the hotel thrived again. It was popular immediately. The celebration of the Battle of Plattsburgh Centennial in 1914 gave them a chance to shine. And the hotel prospered pretty much up until the Depression. The Depression took its toll. World War II took its toll. But it's important to realize it still continued operating as a hotel up to 1951. Despite war and despite depression, the thing that really killed the hotel as a business is the automobile. because the era of people coming in trains with these huge trunks packed for the summer
Stay the whole
ended.
summer.
Now people could go for a day here, a day there, and it led to the downfall of not just this one, but many resorts in the Northeast.
People came by steamboat,
They came by steamboat. The
People
place
came
had its
by-
own steamboat launch.
by trolley, because the trolley line
Yep.
from the Plattsburgh Traction Company
Uh-huh,
came
uh-huh.
right here. I have 2 tokens in my pocket from the traction
And
company.
of course, we had a railroad station right across the
Right
street
there.
from the hotel, had their own Bluff Point Hotel Champlain railroad station parked right there.
Yep.
So 51, huh?
51 is when it closed. I've talked to people who worked here in 1951, and they were stunned that it was closed because all they remember was a packed house. Everybody felt it was busy to the end. These people weren't in a position probably to know what it looked like on the books and all, and I could not find, I would have loved to have found some of that information, and I couldn't. But
Really?
it clearly, they clearly were ready to put it on the market. Remember, it had already changed hands. Delaware and Hudson bowed out in 1939. And somewhere around there, the Mailman brothers, Abraham and Joseph Mailman, who owned the Powell Blade Company, another long-time
Oh,
industry
yes.
in Plattsburgh, they bought the hotel. They're an interesting story in themselves that I
Yes.
couldn't include much of in here. But these were self-made entrepreneurs who the New York Times described as being among the first, I wish I could come up with, kind of multi-industry conglomerates in the country. They were, they probably merit a book as well. And that family name is still active through the philanthropy that those 2 gentlemen, Abraham and Joseph Mailman, began while they owned this hotel.
Isn't that amazing? So many things, key memories. And
Right.
Pal Blade, for anybody my age or older,
Remembers Powell Blade.
remembers Pal Blade. I have Pal Blades in my medicine cabinet at home. And an old-fashioned blade sharpener that you turn to.
And you know what? I don't.
We noticed that. So what happened after 1951?
1951, the place was put up for sale, and it was bought by the Jesuits, the Jesuit province of New York. It was actually called the Jesuit province of New York and Maryland, I believe, at that time.
Yeah.
Again, it's all in the book. They, in the early 50s, there were many more people seeking to become Jesuit brothers than there were facilities to house them. And they had already planned to build a new seminary down in the lower Hudson Valley, but they, number one, they needed to buy time before that was going to be open, and they wanted to establish a new school because of the growth of interest. In fact, the Jesuit training, the Jesuit trainees had become numerous enough, they actually established another province, the Buffalo province, that later was folded back into the New York province. But they came up here and bought the entire property, including the golf course, including the beach. It's very interesting to read some of the early press releases and news reports of early meetings of the Jesuit leaders and people from the city of Plattsburgh. They made clear they wanted to be good citizens, they wanted to buy local products, they wanted to be a force of employment, and they pointed out that they would be a source of employment 12 months a year, not just during the summer season. But when it came to golf, they also made it clear they needed the golf course, and that the golf course would not be public because with the strenuous study program that Jesuit students had to undergo, they needed something for recreation,
Interesting logic.
and the golf course was going to become that focus of recreation. They later changed their mind and leased 9 holes to the Plattsburgh Golf and Country Club, but the Jesuit plan certainly made use of the golf course.
Isn't that amazing?
And then 16 years later, it was a different scenario. The number of people entering the Jesuit ministry was falling. They did not need as many places. The new seminary they had built in Shrub Oak was open, and they made the decision that they were going to leave this area. Again, it's hard to determine other reasons. Some of it apparently dealt with the desire to be closer to an urban area. Another consideration apparently was the cost of maintaining this property. I'm sure the cost of maintaining this property hasn't gone down very much, but it was probably, they were probably limited in how they raised funds. I don't know. But all those things came together, and by 1966, this was on the market. The New York Times had a big picture about this seminary that was for sale.
Yep.
The Jesuit archive in New York City was kind enough to send me up a photocopy of the sales brochure. It says college ready for occupancy.
No kidding.
You remember the price on that, Rich?
I don't. I think they wanted $2 million
I think it was-
originally. They got, I think, 900,000.
Yeah.
I don't remember numbers, but I write them all down.
Yeah. That's interesting all by itself. $900,000.
Yep.
And then what?
It was 1.1 million. I remember seeing it on the
Was it?
plot.
Okay.
1.1 million, and they sold it for 900,000.
So that's basically the history. The college has been here for a long
Well, there's an
time.
interesting story about the fellow who owned it before the college. That was an interesting
Yeah.
part of the book, too.
The Jesuits owned it. At the same time, Plattsburgh was developing plans for a community college. This issue had come up, I guess, off and on in the 50s and 60s, and by the mid-60s, a decision had been made to go ahead. And although you might think that this would be a natural place, at the same token, the county studied at least 7 or 8 other sites, including sites in Cumberland Head, Point of Rush, Cadyville, Schuyler Falls, and in fact 2 different large parcels of land were offered free of charge to the county, and the county legislators felt, understandably, that they had to seriously consider any property that was going to be donated instead of having to be purchased. In the midst of all this, almost with no warning, an educator from Nebraska named Raymond Greenhog, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, all of a sudden on the front page of the Press Republican, there's a news story. He had bought it, and he planned to open a 4-year liberal arts school here. He had done the same thing in Wahoo, Nebraska, had opened a college called John F. Kennedy College. It was designed to be, I won't say an elite institution, but it was designed to be a solid liberal arts school with noted for its small classes, its excellent teaching faculty, and apparently got off the ground fairly well. They did run into financial problems later, but that was after he left. But all of a sudden he owned this college, and he announced he was going to open it next fall. And I suppose Nebraska is different than New York because he somehow assumed that the New York State Board of Regents would be able to walk him through the accreditation process in about 3 months, and he would be
We're
open.
chuckling.
Yeah.
We've seen
And,
those roads.
And so that didn't quite work out. Initially, well, at one point, Clinton Community College, looking to get started, even if they didn't have a permanent campus, showed interest in renting this campus.
Yep.
And Mr. Greenhog initially said no because he was going to have his college open. When he got his first series of delays, he said, well, I can rent it to you, but only for a year because then I'll be opening. And then almost as suddenly as he came onto the scene, he left the scene and clearly didn't get his accreditation for whatever reason. Sold his, it took a while, but we found the transfers in the title search. And 2 years after he bought it, he sold it back to the Bluff Point Golf and Country Club that had purchased the land from the Jesuits and from whom he purchased the building. It's kind of interesting. It's hard to believe, but when the Golf and Country Club purchased the property from the Jesuits, they weren't interested at all in the buildings. All they wanted was a golf course. And so the buildings were a throw-in, and interestingly, there were plenty of suitors for the building. It finally worked out that the college did rent this space. Clinton Community College rented this space for 1 year, 2 years.
Well, if I can add, I was
Yeah.
just in the archives 2 days ago. I was looking up the transcripts of the first graduation held in June 1971. And Dr. Light was conducting the ceremony. I can read in the transcript where he said, hopefully, in the very near future, we can own this property.
Yes.
So at the time of the first graduation in 1971 here, they had not yet officially owned the property, which I found fascinating.
That's interesting, and he's such a dear friend,
Oh,
and what a
absolutely.
dear man, that whole
He is.
family. Isn't that interesting?
So the transfer from, it didn't go from seminary to community college that smoothly.
There's a couple of
And,
skips in there.
but hopefully this is going to be, the owners and proprietors for a long time will be a community college, which for the first time makes all this property open to the public,
Yeah.
you know, at virtually all times. And it's wonderful that this is a space that now anyone could enjoy. You can certainly understand why millionaires wanted to come here, and it's nice now that all the rest of us can too.
It's a rich history which I wager many people viewing this program are not familiar with. They know the college was here, they know the Jesuits were here, they know it was a pretty outstanding place before that, but they probably don't know all those things that you've mentioned in between, and they can find out.
Gordon, this is my favorite quote in the whole book. You want to read it, Rich? It's from Registrar Betty O'Leary. I think she
This is
summed it
back
up.
in, and this was formal dedication of the campus, meaning the Clinton owned it in October of 1972. It seems fitting that an area so magnificently beautiful and so much a part of the early development of the United States is to be maintained for public use and enjoyment. Bluff Point now belongs to the citizens of Clinton County, who may share the breathtaking scenery and sense of history, which for so long had been reserved for only a few.
I love that quote. That is
Isn't
so
it absolutely beautiful, and you and I could not have,
No editing needed on that.
no editing needed on that, but it's absolutely true. There's so many interesting parts of the history, and of course, I'm very delighted to have promoted Clinton Community College in so many ways throughout the years, to serve on the foundation, to have kids that went to school here, to know countless people who graduated in those early graduating classes, to know the first president, and to also try to bear some of those heavy loads that this college has gone through, bad times and good times. Nothing is a given in this world.
There were some growing pains.
And there were growing
but-
pains at times, up and down, but the North Country espoused the idea of having a community college here.
Mm-hmm.
And now anybody who's astute enough to read a newspaper and to pay attention knows that community colleges have finally found their niche.
Absolutely.
I mean, after all of this time, and are considered such a valuable part of the whole education system. And so we instead of being a poor stepsister, community colleges now, for
Taking the
many,
lead.
many young people getting out of high school, the place to go,
Yeah. We've graduated over 1,000 nurses since 1971.
including my daughter, who was a
That's right.
successful critical care nurse for 30
Over
years.
2,000 teachers, law enforcement. I mean, we have over 10,000 graduates of this college. And I had the pleasure of speaking with Bob Bruno. Bob was on the early board of supervisors who fought so hard to create this
Certainly was.
college. And I know you interviewed him back in
Oh,
his
yeah.
racing days as well. And we gave him the very first ever honorary degree we gave to Bob
Did
Bruno.
you really? I have forgotten that.
And walking back to the building after the event, just Bob and myself, I said, Bob, how does it feel knowing that 10,000 students have a college degree as a result of your tenacious hard work to create this college? And he said, it's unimaginable.
And it took people like Bob Bruno and others to carry the flag when
He
it
did.
could have been dropped,
He
you
did.
know?
He fought hard for it.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Was there a part of this process of putting this book together that was especially pleasing to you? Was it the photographs, the writing?
The photographs, working with the photographs and doing the writing were immensely satisfying. Some of the most special things are talking to people who can
Yeah.
give you stories.
I know
And,
you enjoy that.
One is
You're the most gregarious person I've ever met in
we've
my
talked
life.
about
Stories.
we've talked about President Al Light, and I hate to correct you on camera, but he was the second president.
He was a
Second
second.
president.
official.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But,
okay.
uh,
I'm sorry.
He told me a story about back in the 1930s. He grew up here, and it's a wonderful story just that he came back here and became both an educator at Plattsburgh State and then president of Clinton Community College. His brothers all caddied on a golf course here. He had no interest in golf. One day in the 1930s, his brothers convinced him to at least caddy once, because the next day was going to be a tournament and they wouldn't have enough caddies, so he just agreed to do it, probably to just shut them up. And he got up the next morning, not exactly at the crack of dawn. He said he was probably the last caddy to arrive on the course, so almost everybody was out playing. And he didn't even know if he would have any golfers to carry bags for, when a foursome kind of strolled up slowly and asked if he could caddy. And he and the one other guy left in the caddy room, said sure, and they went ahead and caddied for these people. One of them seemed to get a little bit tired. They only played 4 holes and stopped. This is an era where you might get paid $1 or $1.50 to caddy for a day, and the gentleman gave him a $20 tip. And Outright asked the gentleman, he said, thanked him profusely and asked if he might know his name. And he said, sure, son, I'm Babe Ruth. And so you get a story like that, and history becomes very real. A person called me because he remembered vividly in the 1950s when they were going to widen Route 9. Widening Route 9 would have meant tearing down the original stone fence. And one of the brothers at the seminary started moving one rock every time he went down there. Other brothers started joining in.
Come on, I didn't know that story. I love it.
And by the end of the process, the fence had been moved sufficiently to avoid the construction work on the road. That fence is still there. It's been extensively rebuilt this year, in the past couple of years. But again, those kind of stories make it real.
Well, one of my favorites, Rich, I got to share with you, was a story about Doctor. Now, Doctor was a Saint Bernard. And you want to go ahead and tell the story? It's one of my favorites right here about Doctor. You have a picture of Doctor, too, by the way.
Sure. Hold it up until he captures it, and then...
Where is he?
He's right here in the gray section. Doctor, the Saint Bernard.
Calvin will get it on the screen. Got it? Okay. Go ahead.
The great-grandfather of a friend of mine who lives in Ron Santor, who lives in now what's called South Plattsburgh, but back then was called the village of Salmon River. His great-grandfather worked as a night watchman here and also was asked to stay over the winter sort of as a caretaker. He became very friendly with the first manager of the hotel, and he had a dog, a St. Bernard, who lived back at the farm on in Salmon River, and the family taught the dog to go back and forth from Salmon River to here. It would bring the mail, and then he would
when the snow was too deep.
And then he would load the dog up with some baked goods that might have been left over from the night before, and the dog would go back. The dog was actually a gift to this gentleman from Oswald Seavey, the first manager, in appreciation for his efforts.
And there's a photo.
And we have a photo of the dog and the gentleman and his wife on the steps of the original Hotel Champlain.
Isn't that beautiful? What a great story. That's way better than the brandy and the jug and the whole thing, right?
I mean, anecdotes like that are what keep you going when you're doing a book. And it's a real connection to history. And one of the things, when people ask me why I got interested in history, and they ask it because I studied it in college. I didn't study it at all in college, and I really disliked it fervently in high school because I thought all I was doing was memorizing a bunch of dates, places, and names. And over the past 20 years, I've learned history is just it's an interconnection of fascinating stories, and that's how I like to explain history to people. And in here, I get to talk about friends who live almost next door, and people I meet around the community, and I can tie them directly to presidents like William Howard Taft, William McKinley, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, all of whom spent time here. One of my favorite little bits of research in here is that from the time with the exception of 1892, every presidential election, while this was a hotel from 1890 to 1950, every presidential election but one had a major party candidate who had stayed at this hotel. And to me, that's just a fascinating thing.
That interesting?
And even 1892, the president who ran the candidates, both candidates that year, had stayed in the older hotel in Plattsburgh, the Fouquet House, and just didn't stay at this hotel. So this was a hotel that was on the radar for the national press.
I love it. Speaking of the Fouquet House.
Oh, okay.
This is one of my favorite. The legend underneath this is absolutely priceless, and I want you to talk to me a little bit about it, and if you chuckled when you first read it, because this is so interesting. You got it?
I laughed out loud when I
Of
first
course
read
you
it.
did, so did I.
And this is the Plattsburgh train station with the Fouquet House. And you have to understand, you can see the Fouquet House still stands in downtown Plattsburgh.
At least the
across
first
from
level
train
of it, yeah.
station, without the top floor, without the porches. And if you're fortunate enough to find an old book about Plattsburgh, you'll see that there was a full block of formal gardens around the
Oh,
hotel.
yes, beautiful.
And although I had long assumed that this hotel had been built by the railroad, the hotel actually predated the railroad by a good 20 years. It's kind of fascinating to me that the railroad picked this spot. However, the caption, and again, there's history in everything. Once upon a time in postcards, you were only allowed to write this much on a postcard.
Oh, yes.
The address side could not have a message.
That's right.
And so you can date postcards sometimes by where they were allowed to write. A picture of the darn rails that brought me to this joint. It's not part of the Plattsburgh City
Do
seal.
you have any idea who this BJ or BG is?
Not a clue.
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful
clue.
if somebody said, that was my grandfather or my great-grandfather.
Well, we think, we think when this book has come out now, we're going to find even more people coming out of the woodwork with stories.
It always happens.
We're really looking for artifacts. There's so many people in town who have Hotel Champlain china. Some people are bringing back to us to put on display Hotel Champlain pewter silverware, sterling silver teacup and tea servers. So we'd like to put those on display so everybody can enjoy it. So if anybody has stuff at their home, any kind of Hotel Champlain furnishings, or and you'd like the rest of the community to enjoy it, bring it on up. We'll put it on display as a permanent collection.
Calvin, I don't know if he's shown the C on the back of these chairs when we first came in here. Everything in this place has its own little piece of history.
Yeah.
And both of them challenged us to say what the C was, and we had no idea. Take a look at this. That's the Chateauguay.
Chateauguay.
And these were deck chairs.
The first iron-hulled steamer on Lake Champlain, 1888. And these are the chairs off the Chateauguay.
How did they end up here?
That part we don't know.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Did you have to restore them?
They were actually, the inmates up at Clinton Correctional reupholstered them. So it's not the original upholstery. But in terms of the original wood frame, if you flip them over, you can see the brand. It says made in Czechoslovakia, where it was branded on the chairs. And somehow they made their way across the ocean and on the deck chairs of the Chateauguay.
There are pictures in here of what the docks looked like.
Yes.
And the steamers did come here. The
Yeah.
steam...
There's one right behind you. Oh,
Steam
Calvin can
traffic
touch that
and
one.
trade on
The
Lake
Chateauguay
Champlain
Company.
is a very important part of the history of this area, the commerce up and down the lake, and we've covered that and various other things. But were there revelations in this book? Did you have an occasional epiphany saying, I did not know that?
Oh, probably about one a day.
Yeah.
Was there really? I can imagine that.
One was when I looked into the William McKinley days here, realizing that in 1899, while the Spanish-American War is going on, the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of War, the Secretary of the Interior, and the Postmaster General were up here for most of the month.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, here we are, we're in Plattsburgh, New York, outside Plattsburgh, New York, in this beautiful spot, and they're running the whole government from here.
Well, I think you were talking about the access to the president. You told the story about the farmer from West Shazy.
Yeah.
Who hadn't, that's a great story.
And this was out of the New York Times, actually. A farmer from West Shazy walked. I think the security around the president was different in those days.
You think so? It might have been.
and a farmer from West Shazy walked all the way here, asked to meet the president, and he said, "I just came here because I want to be able to say I shook the hand of the president of the United States." Shook his hand, went back home, probably took care of the cows.
Isn't that wonderful?
There was another instance where a gentleman came up, asked to meet the president, and he apparently, there was a family story that he had been patted on the head when he was a baby by George Washington. and he said he wanted to come up here
Before he
so
died.
that he could say that he had had a chance to meet both the first and the last president of the United States during his lifetime.
Now, that's a story you couldn't make up.
Oh, absolutely.
You couldn't, you
Absolutely.
know, kissing babies and patting
Yes,
them on the head.
uh,
Isn't that absolutely incredible?
But people talked about seeing the president in town. This was true with Taft when he was here as well. Certainly when Teddy Roosevelt was here, I mean, he was as gregarious as anyone you're going to meet.
Oh, my goodness.
He spent a lot of time at the Plattsburgh Barracks and
With his
and met
well-known
soldiers.
speeches and so on, his arguments with the President of the United States at the time and so on. Oh, it's
And then there's,
wonderful.
you find, I mean, one epiphany was to realize how well this place was covered by the New York Times during its heyday. It was a rare week, and I'm not talking just about when, say, McKinley was here, and the whole press entourage, which of course was a lot smaller in these days, but major papers sent their correspondence up here. But even the rest of the summer, every summer, the New York Times almost weekly would have some article about the goings-on here. In the travel section, when they listed what was going on at major resorts in the country, Hotel Champlain would always be listed. And you would see news items. One of the ones that caught my eye, which I thought was really funny, it's Mr. Sachs and Mr. Bloomingdale have arrived on their yacht from New York City to the Hotel Champlain, where they will be spending a week. So I'm thinking to myself today, I think that would be an idyllic trip, getting on my boat in New York City, coming all the way up through the
Can
canal
you imagine
system,
through the canals?
and then just kind of plopping down here for a few weeks.
Well, Rich discovered an article about this cottage that we're in now was one of the original 11 cottages built in 1890 as part of the hotel. So even though the main hotel burned down, 4 of the 11 are still standing today. Rich found an article about this particular cottage we're in now caught on fire in 1929. It was the cottage that belonged to, it was always rented out by a Judge Glennon out of New York City. He brought his family up here for the entire season. They think a spark from the second floor fireplace caused the third floor,
That
but
makes
they didn't
sense.
lose the whole building. I mean, they
That's
talked
the
about the
top.
fire brigade who came up here and put the fire out and was rebuilt a couple years later, and Judge Glennon returned and
Yep.
continued to spend his summers here.
What wonderful, absolutely wonderful
Story
stories.
after story after story.
And as you both mentioned before, this will generate more stories.
The two eras that were most difficult to research, one was the Jesuit seminary era. Again, the Jesuit archives in New York City were very helpful. I was also able to glean a fair number of anecdotes from people in the city, in the area. But I would love to have more on that area. But you know what the other difficult area, era was in the 1940s when it was owned by Pal Blade.
Yeah.
And
It's
I
kinda sketchy.
have found surprisingly few artifacts. Yet, when you look, one of my favorite pictures in the book is on page 66 and 67. One of the things that Pal Blade did is they built a whole new cabana at Lakeside and a boardwalk behind the beach. And when you see these two pictures, which I received courtesy of Richard Kelly, who had a collection of photos and postcards of the hotel, I would love to have more information on this era. We did. Steve and I both had a chance to meet with a gentleman
Joe
who
Lapierre.
worked here in the 1940s and early 50s, who gave jujitsu lessons
Come on.
to hotel guests on the
You
beach.
gotta be kidding me.
And
And he was a waiter here at the hotel. And
the jujitsu pictures got to us just too late for inclusion in the
Oh,
book.
that would have been
But
great.
anybody who looks for the new expanded edition at the 200th anniversary of the hotel should look for the jujitsu pictures.
I've got to interject something here about the New York Times. The New York Times has always been fascinated with this entire Adirondack region. It spent an awful lot of time here during the first and second decade of the 20th century, and this Plattsburgh idea was just a big deal for the New York Times. They had their Sunday pictorial section spent hundreds and hundreds of hours and beautiful full newspapers were this wide back in those days and this big, and I had an entire bound edition of the New York Sunday pictorial sections just dealing with the Plattsburgh idea and the officer training here, and I donated it to the Clinton County Museum a few years ago. So the New York Times
great
featured
resource.
this area over and over and over again.
There's also a small library in New York City that has the original menus from the Hotel Champlain. We're able to log
Oh,
on. We actually
really?
can read what they served every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Plus, they would list the entertainment that evening on the menus, and you can see the examples of what the food was like up here. It was absolutely amazing. This was a pretty high-end.
And there was a sense of humor, because we
Yeah.
found one of those menus that detailed the meal for the Martian Festival of 1897.
Come on.
It is not just the New York Times, because if you look here, this is Harper's
Yeah,
Weekly.
let me hold that up to
And
Calvin.
you have to put it in perspective. That was kind of like the combined Time, Life, Newsweek, and People of that era. It was one of the foremost national magazines. And if you look at the date of that full-size front page cover of Hotel Champlain, that was within a month after the hotel opened in 1890.
No kidding.
It's-
So you wish you had had twice as much time to put this together.
No
Well,
writer,
you've seen-
no writer ever says anything but they wish they'd had twice as much time. to
Even
put it
though you've
together.
spent a lot of time climbing mountains and walking trails and living, I won't say a life of leisure, but at least,
No.
at least being able to enjoy nature some days at a leisurely pace. You do work well under pressure.
I have to work under pressure, and I guess
Well, as a physician.
it's not exactly a life of leisure, but I guess I've learned to work hard and play hard. The hours fly by when you're on a project like this.
Don't they?
You will start reading at 7 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden you'll realize it's midnight. I poured over. The internet certainly changes things. It allows you to do research in a different way. But to follow a story through, there's no substitute for going back to the original newspapers. And
There's no-
you take advantage of the Plattsburgh State Library, and the hours fly by even on microfilm. And as tedious as it sounds, you can get fascinated following a story, mainly because of all you run into on the way. Because as I'm scrolling through the papers, I pay attention to every movie that was playing at the time.
Oh, you.
Movies, by the way, are a part
I'm
of the
laughing
history
because
of
I
this.
do exactly the same.
But it does. There's no substitute for just going down and doing the research.
At one time, there was 4 newspapers in Was it 4 or 5? That was struck me.
It was up to 5, but there were 4 daily papers in the era. In the beginning of the 20th century, there were 4 daily papers. There was
In Plattsburgh.
the Plattsburgh Press, the Plattsburgh Republican, the Plattsburgh Sentinel, and the Clinton County Farmer. At one point, there was a Plattsburgh Evening News around that same time. I'm forgetting one, and I would have to look it up, but those were the main ones.
Yeah.
And the Press took over the Sentinel at one point, and it wasn't until around 1940, give or take a few years, that the Press and the Republican merged. The other thing that's important to remember if you go read these papers is the the Plattsburgh Evening News, Plattsburgh Telegram.
Oh, that's right.
And newspapers were very politically partisan. You have to bear in mind the Plattsburgh Republican was the Democrat paper. The Plattsburgh Press was a Republican paper. And it took me a while to figure that
Just
out.
the history of newspapers in our nation is a wonderful study.
I hope that history isn't coming to an end.
You know what? You and I have both written for the Press Republican for a long time, and it grieves me to see what's happening to newspapers. A few months ago, for the first time since the invention of the internet, the New York Times charges people to peruse their daily stories on the internet. And what the internet has done for newspapers and magazines and the various other periodicals is interesting, and just your mention of research.
Well, it's interesting.
Research just changed its definition with the internet.
What's interesting to me, we had a conversation about when people took photos back then. It's wonderful when they write on the back of the photo, so we don't have to guess what it is. Today, with digital photographs, nobody's writing on them. So it's getting even harder to identify photos. I think, as
How
we go
often have we
forward.
talked about it as we sat and tried to identify old photographs?
We got a lot of
Nowadays,
photos from the Library of Congress and from the Detroit Publishing Company, which did all the postcards back at the turn of the century. They wrote right on the front of each postcard, lower left-hand corner, the date and what the photo is of. which is tremendously valuable today. So I'm wondering, 100 years from now, it's all digital photographs. What is it of? Who's in it?
A question that comes to mind is, are you both satisfied with the results? I mean, that's a big question based on the fact that you're both very much involved and you spent so many hours.
I think, actually, I think all of us can be pretty proud of this product. I've never written a column even without the next day finding a few things I might have said a little bit differently or said a little bit better. But I think the book holds up as a fascinating story of an important niche in our area's history. I think that, number one, you want to make sure it's factually correct. So far, I think it's factually correct. I'm waiting for people to call me. But
Mary Ann Weigelhofer held our feet to the fire.
And
she wanted three confirmed sources
and
to confirm those.
The fact-checking was extensive, to say the least, on this book. I think the story holds together, and I would love to have had another, it could have been twice as long. We could have included more photos, but I think that's always the way. I think one advantage of the fact that we had a 112-page limit is that...
They told you right off the bat.
Yeah, number of words, number of photos.
Oh, okay.
But I think it leaves it eminently readable. You don't have to read it in one fell swoop. It's kind of organized, so you can kind of read it as 5 separate stories, 5 separate essays in time, and I think that may have worked to its benefit. You do something that's 3 times as long, you worry that people aren't going to put in the energy to pick it up. I think this is something that people can read in an evening or a series of evenings. I'm pretty happy with it, and I think that everybody else who worked on it, I get credit because my name's on the cover. I mean, people don't recognize the hours that somebody like Steve put in, that Mary Ann put in, that Priscilla put in, that Gina put in, and I guess the proof of the pudding will be whether or not these people would ever agree to work with me again on a project, because it turned out to be more work for all of us than we expected. But it was very interesting to me because it's the first time I've worked on a project like this with so many people, and the mutual respect and discussion as we try everything from figuring out the title to figuring out the focus. For me, it was wonderful because everybody had ideas. The fact that my name's on the cover didn't mean that automatically everything I said was accepted as being the ideal way to do things. And I think the interplay between us was remarkably good. And I think you got 5 people who worked together on a fairly interesting, albeit challenging product in a relatively short period of time. And I think everybody ended up with even more mutual respect than we had when we began the process.
Absolutely.
And the board agrees?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Fortunately, the Clinton Community College Foundation underwrote the publishing of the book and the whole project. And so if anybody wants copies of the book, they're right here available through the CCC Foundation. Can
they order it online?
Not yet. I'm not that sophisticated. Give me a call. Send me an email. Stop by. The books are $20. It's no taxes because it's a foundation product. So we're very excited. We're at the pace that they're going. They're going to be gone, and we have to get another edition out here, Rich.
Okay.
So they're being very popular.
Was there an ultimate goal when you finished this project as to how many you hope to sell?
Not really. First, I'll just 10 years ago we said, wouldn't it be nice someday to write a book? And we finally did it. So I'm just so happy that we've got the
pieces of the history of Clinton Community College.
It's mentioned in other books, but there was never one complete sit down. And Rich doesn't want to call it a history; it's a chronicle. We argued over that word for weeks.
Oh,
it's a chronicle,
that,
which is for good reason, I think. But it does sit. You can let the reader. You can walk the reader right through from the Native Americans when they were here at the Bluff, all the way up through today when it was Clinton Community College.
Here's another thing just jumped into my mind. One of those stray thoughts, and I have a lot of those.
Watch out!
I was going to say, I
here it comes.
Did any famous or infamous people who stayed here at the hotel keep journals?
I haven't found any. That's a good question. A couple of things. One, the first hotel burned, so probably everything was lost. Then the D&H sold it, and it became unclear where the D&H records went. I am told that a lot of the D&H records were stored in a barn on the property that later burned. I can't verify that. Unfortunately, like the hotel, the D&H has evolved, so there's no longer a D&H. The D&H was bought and is now part of the the Canadian Pacific Railroad conglomerate. And so there was no easy way to find records. I had assumed when I began the project that I would be able to find hotel registers. And I figured there must be a basement full of stuff here. Well, there isn't, because it's changed hands several times. And
Old records are destroyed.
Yep.
It grieves me every time I see a dump truck full of old paperwork.
Yep.
Photographs
Yep.
and paperwork go to the dump. And how
Speaking
many
of
people have
photographs,
done that?
Rich discovered this woman, Catherine
What page are we
McClellan,
on?
33, and she had a studio here on the grounds, and Rich was able to access a lot of these photos. They're from the Clinton County Historical Association. Because she was on the grounds, she was able to capture some wonderful photographs.
That's a good point.
I've never seen
Was
them before. She had a studio
related to
here.
the McClellans up in Champlain?
no, no.
Her studio was in the bungalow. It was one of the other original cottages here.
Wow, no kidding.
Oh, there's lots of things. You find out
Yeah,
that
that's a neat story.
they have their own spring and they bottle their own water.
They had their own
I mean,
spring
this was
water.
a fairly, again, if you were a hotel in the 1890s
I had heard
up
that,
here,
too. See
you
the
had to be
spring
a
down
fairly
there.
self-sufficient community.
You can still see it today. If you drive just south of our entrance towards Bluff Point Golf Course, you'll see this little octagon building just off the road.
Absolutely.
That was where they bottled the spring water. There's still the machine in there that used to put the caps on the bottles, and
It wasn't sulfur water though, was it?
that was not. That was good,
No,
clean
no.
water.
Because
Good,
these
clean.
so-called springs, you
Yeah.
know, I just came back from a vacation in Messina, and they had Messina Springs and Saratoga Springs, and how many spas have we visited?
No, this was pure drinking water. It's also worth looking at the book. Even if you're not interested in a hotel, it's interesting to look at the fashion, see what people wore when they
Oh,
played
absolutely.
golf, see what people wore when they went out for a walk.
And when they came
Try to
on a
imagine,
steamer and,
swinging a driver when you're a woman in a long billowing skirt.
Well, the women, when they arrived off the cars, you said they had a...
They had a special changing room because in those days, remember, riding a car in 1910 was a pretty dusty experience.
They call it a duster, didn't
Yeah,
they?
it's no, there were fascinating things to learn every day about it. The next edition, there were a few myths that I had to dispel in the book.
There are always those, aren't there?
McKinley Cottage, which was I was always told McKinley Cottage was where McKinley stayed when he came here and was for the summer White House, and it made perfect sense to me that the president would be in his own cottage and all. And it turns out that the cottages back then, it wasn't named McKinley. The cottages were much more creatively named. It was Cottage 1, Cottage 2, Cottage 3, and so
We're in
forth.
cottage number 7.
Yeah,
I love it.
but McKinley actually stayed in the annex of the hotel. He did not stay in the cottage, so I don't know where the name came from. But you find little myths that you have to explode periodically. If there's one myth I'm still working on, it's the myth of the Normandy. And I didn't know very much about the Normandy. You get off on all sorts of side stories. And the Normandy was the luxury steamship
Oh, it was
of the
absolutely
1930s,
beautiful.
a French ship. And when World War II broke out, the ship was in port in New York, and the captain would not take it back to occupied France. Unfortunately, it eventually burned and sank, but before that, it was going to be converted into a troop ship, and all the interior furnishings were sold. It's stated that in the 1940s, this hotel was remodeled extensively, and they made extensive use of furnishings from the Normandy. I haven't been able to prove it. There are some remnants of furniture around town, and that's part of the story I'll still look into. That'll be definitely in the 200th anniversary edition. But I went through auction lists from the Normandy, I went through news coverage, and I haven't been able to prove that extensive furnishings came from the Normandy. But that's still an open question, and there are, I have been told of people who have some of those Normandy furnishings, and if anybody watching has any Normandy furnishings, I'd like to hear about it. We've compared photos from the Normandy, and there are many books about the Normandy, and collectibles from the Normandy take up a fairly good chunk of eBay cyberspace. It's a very active collectible community. So that's something I still have to learn.
So interesting, and I mentioned an anecdote before we started the cameras, and the fact that my father had a great sense of history, and he actually brought us to watch the Normandy burn when I lived in Thornwood in Westchester County. And my father was a minister and worked nights for the Reader's Digest in the shipping department. We jumped in the car and headed over and watched the Normandy burn, and that's a very vivid memory for me as a child. And then to read all the stories later as to how it happened and why it happened and how it never should have happened and how many faux pas there were involved in the process. But now it all comes
full circle.
Yep.
And everything is connected. And you have connected so many of the separate stories that we've heard down through the years about Clinton Community College. Steve, I know this is a satisfying job for you, heading up
Oh, absolutely.
the foundation up here, and to watch this college grow. You've been here long enough to see down times and good times, and hopefully there are a lot of more good times in the future.
I've had a sneak peek of what the next 10 years are going to look like up here, and it's going to be a tremendous growth up here in the next 10 years.
Well, we've talked about it so many times. We love the advent of technology.
Yep.
We love solar power and wind power and all the things that may revolutionize our future. And to see that Clinton Community College is on the cutting edge,
Taking the lead in this area.
taking the lead.
Absolutely.
To see the wonderful new buildings that have been
Yeah.
that have been built, all adhering to the architectural integrity that was started way back when.
We are the proud stewards of this beautiful old hotel, and it's expensive to keep this building up and running and maintained, and the grounds. But you know what? That's our job. We are the stewards of this beautiful property and this hotel, and we'll continue to respect the history up here. And as we build new buildings, to try to make sure that they fit into the historical character and architecture.
You'd have to be pretty hard-hearted not to come to this place for the first time, and every time for me, and not be somehow moved
Yeah.
by the vistas, and now by the actual history of this place. I'm sure it's been besides being exhausting, it's been an enriching experience for you to put this together, Rich.
No question. No, it's been satisfying all the way through.
And I'm so happy that it's been successful for you. This was talked about for some time
For years.
before
Absolutely.
it was done.
Yeah.
It was important to do it right now. Everything has its time and place. And
I can
this
feel the
was-
next edition may not be too far around the corner, Rich. So.
Oh, really? Like tomorrow
I don't
morning?
know.
Yeah.
Depends if
Probably not tomorrow morning.
not tomorrow, but there's enough information out there. I think, and we know there's more information out there.
Oh,
So
lots.
Anybody watching this, contact myself or contact Rich. Let us know you're out there. If you have artifacts that you wouldn't mind sharing back with us, we'll put them on display. If you have stories and photographs or any of those things, we'd love to collect them. Someday my goal is to have a small museum here
I
on
was just
campus,
going
a
to
Hotel
ask,
Champlain.
you know, with all your other
Yeah.
sometimes far-fetched ideas,
Yeah,
now
that's
you've
okay. I
had
got quite a few
wonderful
of them.
dreams and ideas. And why wouldn't you have a small
Yeah,
place?
we've got a
like
nice
that?
little archive room here on campus, and with Mary Ann and our library staff, they're professional archivists. They won't admit to that, but we can take care of these things so the future can come back and enjoy. If you walk into the hotel now and walk down the college, and you walk down the concourse, we have beautiful display cases.
Yeah.
Of this sterling silver tea sets and on display so people can enjoy them. So I know they're out there, and if people want to donate them back, we'll put a little name on it, donated by, and let the rest of the community and future generations enjoy some of the artifacts from the hotel.
Once again, before we wrap this up, I want to let people know how they can get their copy. And some people will want 5 or 10 copies as Christmas gifts.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy. Just give me a call at the foundation office. Number is 562-4195. We're open Monday through Friday during regular business hours, and they're available for $20 a copy, no tax. And we've got. We ordered originally 500 copies of the book. There's probably around 250 left. Half of them are already gone, so that's only within the first month. So if you like a
You
copy,
should have known. It just looks like hotcakes, doesn't it? Huh?
Certainly.
absolutely.
So what's your next major project?
I don't have a next major project. This one took a lot of time. We got to celebrate it 2 weeks ago with a wonderful gala here at the college.
And Dr. Frost was sporting a tuxedo, a beautiful tuxedo. He said the last time he wore a tux was his high school prom. So he looked like $1,000,000.
They had tuxedos back then?
That'll be one of the historic photos of the next year.
Absolutely.
No long tails though, right?
No.
He looked great.
Isn't that great? So we are happy with the skin we're in.
Absolutely.
We're happy with what's happened on this campus and delighted with this book. You're both wonderful friends, Dr. Richard Frost and I wish it were Dr. Steve Frederick.
Well, that's okay. I'm still a farm boy from West Shazy and still love what I do up here.
I love it. We'll wrap it up in just a minute.
Thank you.
We had to wrap it up outside. This
Oh,
is
it's a
the
beautiful
most
day. Look at
spectacular
this.
day in the North Country
It's fantastic.
on the 5th day of August. May it be this way for a couple of more months.
Couple more months. Won't be long, though.
The campus at Clinton Community College will be so busy in a few weeks.
We love that, though. I mean, as much as we like the quietness over the summer, you got to realize what you're here for. And when you see all these students here and you can't get a parking spot, and, that's what it's all about, is having a full load of students in our classes and keeping our enrollments high and keeping some good graduates coming into our local economy.
Steve, wasn't it fun to put this book
gosh.
together?
I'm
to meet today with Dr. Frost.
I'm a history nut. I'm just a local guy who just enjoys history, and to take this project, I had no idea the amount of work that goes into writing a book. You and Rich have authored before, and you know what it's like. I haven't. And the amount of detail and the checking of facts and the checking of spelling and proofreading and making sure you credit the photos from the actual source of the photos, and arranging the photos and arguing over the title of the book for
Of
3 weeks. We argued
love it.
over the title of the book. Gave me a much better appreciation for the finished product, and I'm pretty proud of ours.
Of course, it's always wonderful to interview you and Dr. Frost, who's been a dear friend for so many years. But what made the whole thing worthwhile, it was like the capstone. When I walked out, and there's Teresa Bruno,
Yeah.
widow of the late Bob Bruno,
The champion.
looking at the book
Yeah.
and seeing that expression
Yeah.
on her face as she gushed
Yeah.
with praise.
Well, I'm a fan of Bob, and it was clear that through the early days of the formation of this college, Bob Bruno was the one who fought for this creation.
Yes.
And if it wasn't for his tenacity and his willingness to roll up his sleeves and get this, there wouldn't be a Clinton Community College. So I made sure, there will never be a book written without some kind of photo of Bob Bruno and telling of the Bob Bruno story at this college, because we really consider him the father of Clinton Community College.
Another chapter in the history of the Bluff has been written, and believe me, it's an open-ended book.
Oh, there's more to come. That's another whole story we'll have to do about the future of Clinton Community College.
I think we've already made a commitment that we'll come back up here on this bluff, and I'll come up here at the drop of a hat.
Anytime.
Steve,
It's
thanks,
a pleasure.
Thanks
It's always
so much,
a pleasure.
my
Thank
friend.
you, sir.
I'll shake your hand.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you all for watching this program called Our Little Corner. Thanks for your comments and suggestions, and above all, thank you for any monetary contributions you can make to keep this going far, far into the future. And who knows where we're going to